communicate with us. The folks in Circle, there's even a QA button where you can add questions as they pop up for you throughout the call. Feel free to go ahead in the chat. Just drop in where you're calling from. And if you're running for office, what office you're running for. I'm going to go ahead and just sort of demonstrate here and say I am Rob in Maine. And as I said, we will just give a minute or two to let people get settled, and then we'll get started. And the name of the game today is How to Win Your Debate or Forum. I see another Rob in Utah. As I'm fond of saying, two Robs don't make a right. Derek also in Maine. We got two Robs and a Ron. This is great, great rhyming. Rob in Idaho. We've got Lincoln Heights in Ohio, North Carolina. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started. And like I said, if you're in the Zoom call, use that Q&A button to ask questions throughout. We love to incorporate questions throughout these trainings. If you're in Circle, if you drop your questions in the chat, they will make their way over to me as well. But welcome to Good Party Academy Live. This is How to Win Your Debate or Forum. And debates and forums are among some of the highest stakes moments in a campaign. You know, unlike a house party or a simple door knock, you don't get to pick the questions that you're being asked, and you don't get to filter the audience. You also don't get infinite time. You know, you have to make the most usually of a 1 minute or 2 minute response period. But there's good news too. Debates aren't about winning every single exchange. They're about leaving voters with confidence in you and winning one or two key moments, right? Voters walk away with impressions, not the exact transcript. So if you're able to have a punchy, memorable, one or two lines, then keep your composure throughout the entire debate. That'll help you come across as the winner. It helps you come across as authentic, and that's what we're here to work on today. So we're going to cover understanding the environment and debates and forums in general. We're going to cover how to prepare for debates. We're going to cover delivery and performance best practices, and also how to handle tough questions and attacks, as well as creating moments that stick. And we'll even talk about some additional resources that we have available in our community and throughout our site. And the objective here is really just to give you the tools and confidence that you need, not only to participate in debates, but to win over voters with these really unique moments in time. So without further ado, I want to go ahead and introduce today's expert, a good friend of mine, Derek Lane. Derek is a senior campaign success manager here at goodparty.org, and he's worked with dozens of candidates all across the country, preparing not just on how to show up in debates, but how to excel in debates. And he's seen firsthand what works on the stage and what doesn't. So Derek, in your own words, tell us a little bit about your bona fides for debate prep and a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. It is my pleasure to be here with you guys again today. I have worked with candidates for, the lion's share of the last 15 years now. Typically before my time here at Good Party, I mostly worked with state ledge candidates, state house, state senate, and congressional candidates. And helping them in all kinds of aspects of their campaign. Nowadays, my bread and butter here at goodparty.org is helping candidates sort of refine their message, connect with voters through outreach, and ultimately help them win really tough races. So I'm excited to be here, excited to talk about this. It is just about now. I think most of you guys know, probably have been receiving the invitations. It is debate and forum time. It is that part of the year. So excited to dive into this with you guys.
Yeah, once Labor Day comes, really a lot of campaigns that have that November election deadline shift into the voter awareness phase where everyone is ready, they're tuning in, and debates start popping up. But Derek, let's start with the basics. Why do debates and forums matter so much to campaigns?
Yeah, they matter because for most people, it is the only time they are going to see all of the candidates side by side. It'll be the opportunity for you to make a comparison, right? To draw contrast between yourself and your opponent. And they often generate coverage, whether it's from news write-ups, clips that you can use on social media, or word of mouth in your community. And just to sort of double tap on something you said at the top, but voters don't remember everything you say, right? The key of a debate or a forum is to make sure voters have an impression of you, that they have an understanding of what you stand for, and that you're competent and capable to hold the office that you're running for. So your job is not as a candidate to win the room, but ultimately is to win the voter at home who's going to watch this forum or debate later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some of the most famous debate moments of all time, the ones that they teach in school books are, JFK and Nixon, and that idea of where Nixon was making a lot of really salient points, but he looked so disheveled on stage that it being one of the first televised debates, it led to America kind of like having a little bit of a sour taste, and he lost the debate just because of appearances. So again, those impressions that you make on voters really matter. That's one of the things that you have to nail and get right. What are some of the biggest mistakes, Derek, that you've seen candidates make during debates?
Yeah, there's two big ones that immediately come to mind. First, I think is thinking they need to like just crush every single question that comes their way, every single exchange that they have with their opponent. I think 99 times out of 100, that just makes you look combative. And secondly, and I think this is most troublesome for folks who enjoy nuance, but I think the second biggest mistake I see is people diving way too deep into the policy weeds. At the end of the day, you want voters to be able to repeat what you said and carry it with them. And if you're getting way too nitty gritty into the details, they won't be able to see the forest through the trees for sure.
Yeah, so definitely losing clarity, getting a little bit too deep into the weeds, and kind of losing the plot on stage. I'm curious for those of you who are watching along in Circle and elsewhere in the chat. I'd love to hear what makes you nervous about debates or forums. What are some of the things that come up for you as nerves, and we'll try to respond to those. But let's talk preparation, Derek. You've worked with a lot of candidates, as you've said. What does good debate prep really look like?
Yeah, good debate prep comes down to, I think, three sort of key things you have to understand walking in. One, you've got to know yourself. You have to have the three key points maybe that you want to hit on the debate, 1 to 2 stories that illustrate them. We'll talk a little bit later about how to weave stories into the points that you're trying to make. Knowing your opponent, I think, is important. Being able to anticipate their likely attacks, and also what their likely hit lines are going to be with the audience, having an understanding of that. And knowing the format, what are the rules, what are the time limits, how long do you get to speak, what order do you speak in, where are you sitting on the stage, are you going to be behind a podium, you're all going to be sitting at the table, right? Having a firm understanding of what the environment, rules, regulation, who the moderator is going to be, all that's going to be really important building blocks for prepping yourself to go into an environment like a forum. And it definitely does not mean memorizing every single answer. And we'll talk about like how to build anchor statements and how to pivot back to your message when you're unsure. But you don't have to memorize every single answer that you think might be asked. It's really about making sure that no matter what comes your way, you're able to pivot back from that message back to your campaign, back to your values, and back to your why statement.
Yeah, awesome. And I dropped in the Zoom chat here those 3 main points of debate prep. And lifting up from the chat some of the things that our candidates are saying that they're nervous about: the short time limit on questions, not being a great speaker and having a tendency to ramble when I'm nervous. That one strikes accord with me. And being new to politics when my opponent is a much more seasoned politician, which I think is an opportunity as well as something to be nervous about. That's a really great point in a debate to be able to draw a little bit of contrast around. And we'll talk about the importance of drawing contrast as we get into it a little bit deeper. But speaking of the opponent themselves, Derek, how much time should candidates spend worrying or preparing for their opponent in particular?
Yeah, I think it depends on whether you're doing a debate or a forum, which typically have different rules of engagement. But I mean, enough to anticipate there are 2 or 3 likely hits on you or attacks on you, 2 or 3, rebuttals to sort of their, again, popular lines that they might throw out. But at the end of the day, you basically need 3 anchor phrases, 3 pivots to get back to your message. So that no matter sort of what question is asked or how your opponent responds, you are able to succinctly and confidently respond to whatever they say. And I think for a lot of people, I empathize a lot with folks feeling nervous being on stage. But I think once you get the sort of flow of how a pivot works, it takes a lot of the fear out of this whole process. But I certainly can acknowledge that the nerves that come with being on stage, and hopefully we can teach you guys these anchor phrases to feel more confident as we go through this.
Yeah, great. So we'll dig into those anchor phrases in a little bit. But any advice for people as they balance being prepared and also staying natural? I know that authenticity is everything when it comes to these debates. And sometimes a trap that people fall into is sounding too rehearsed.
Yeah. The trick is to avoid scripts. Build, again, what I call anchor phrases. These are short, repeatable phrases that you can sort of plug into whatever answer that you're responding to, and then tying it to stories, because stories always sound natural and they almost always connect emotionally. This is something that I think, thinking about campaigners I've seen over the last 15 years, something President Obama did very well. He could, every single point he was talking about, he could talk about Maria in St. Louis who was experiencing this problem, right? So when you tie stories in, I think it not only becomes a lot easier to talk about because you're maybe not necessarily directly talking about yourself directly, which can give some folks some nerves, but it also helps you weave in these points in a way that is human, is relatable, and iPhone down here, I will give you some examples here of anchor phrases as we go through. But ultimately, you're going to want to connect your value statements to stories. That is such a huge thing, and if it's a skill you can master, it'll make you a sort of top level forum and debate prep candidate. So.
Yeah. So in the chat here in Zoom, as well as over on Circle, we're getting a lot of questions about anchor phrases. I think you whet people's beak and their curiosity enough. Let's talk about those anchor phrases and a couple of examples of how candidates can use them in a forum or debate. And I saw a question in Circle too. Is this advice that we're giving true of meet and greets where all candidates are present? And I would say yes on almost everything. So these anchor phrases are really important.
Yeah. So an anchor statement is a short, repeatable phrase that you can sort of drop in to almost any answer to stay grounded to your core message. Okay. They work almost like a verbal compass, right? They should be simple, a line that you can say naturally without any notes, repeatable, so it sounds authentic no matter sort of how many times you say it over the course of the debate. Flexible, meaning you can connect it to a bunch of different issues or questions, and directional. And this is the big one. It pulls the conversation back to your vision, your values, your priorities. That's huge. When you're in a debate or in a forum, the ideal is that you are sort of controlling the conversation. I don't want to say you answer the questions you wish you were asked, but we're going to sort of walk you guys through the process of how to swing that question you might not want to answer and connect it to your values. but ultimately what they're doing is connecting the issue back to your bigger why. So an example that I like to give is, how would you handle the city budget, right? The city budget shortfall. A lot of you guys are running for city council or for school board and have to deal with budgets, but the anchor phrase that I would use at the beginning of my answer is every decision comes down to how it impacts working families, right? And that is your anchor statement. And you can then take any other questions that are sort of related to that, or that you can connect back to this idea that your number one priority is helping working families. You can use that as a direction to pull folks back into your vision, right? So that's a big one. We'll talk about more as we sort of go into pivots. But my absolute favorite pivot, my favorite anchor statement that I use, that I prep my candidates to use, is that's one perspective. But what I'm hearing from voters is X, Y, and Z, right? And then you sort of shift it back into a value statement, you shift it back into a why, you shift it back into your campaign priorities. So plenty more to talk about that. I think anchor statements are better understood in writing, I think a lot of the times than saying it out loud. But at the end of the day, it is a value statement that you can use to connect your answers to your campaign.
And there are some pretty famous examples of anchor statements as well. I think of two Ronald Reagan anchor statements that he used both on the campaign trail and in debates. On the campaign trail, he often anchored to, "Are you better off than you were 4 years ago?" Like that's the really famous speech that he gave when he announced his reelection bid. But in debates, he had a habit of saying, "There you go again," and that was a way for him to calmly dismiss attacks and signal composure without redirecting or sounding defensive. Similarly, Bill Clinton would often say, "I feel your pain." And then pivot back to what he really wanted to talk about. It let people feel heard. It let there be a short emotional anchor to convey empathy that didn't dismiss the lived experience, but then allowed to pivot back. So lots of good examples of these on the largest stage possible. I want to pivot now ourselves, and I want to talk a little bit about performance and delivery. We've talked about how important that is and how it can make or break a debate. Now that you've done the prep work, Derek, how important is delivery compared to substance?
It's the name of the game, especially if it is televised. Sort of going back to Rob's example with JFK and Nixon, with the first televised debate. There are many people who say if they listen to the debate on the radio, said Nixon won, right? And folks who watched the debate said JFK won, and that had to do with presentation and delivery on camera. And you can imagine that if we were in a room full of people, it's essentially the equivalent of being on camera when you're directly in front of eyeballs. So delivery can either amplify your message or completely undermine it. I mean, that's the big thing. Voters are often going to be judging your tone, your body language, and your confidence. They're going to absorb all of that before they ever hear what it is you're saying, and sort of absorb the content of your message. A shaky voice can sink a very strong point, and a calm tone can elevate a moment, especially if your opponent's getting loud. So I think when we're talking about best practices, if you're at a table or at a podium, you're going to want to have a very open posture, steady eye contact with the moderator, your opponent, the audience, right? Sort of depending on who the either is asking the question or is receiving the answer to the question. Still hands. If you're a person like me and you talk a lot with your hands, that's a hard thing to figure out. But you want to sort of remain poised while you're sitting there at the table. Your voice, you want it to be slow it down for key points. Project, vary your tone throughout your sentence. And again, you always want to sort of be balancing your attention between moderator, opponent, and audience. So.
Yeah. And when it comes to body language in general, those are some really good guidelines of things to do. What are some pitfalls that you see? What are some mistakes with body language that people make?
Yeah, I think crossing their arms, that's a big one. That makes you look defensive. Looking down too often, I think, gives the impression that you're unprepared. I saw something pop up in the chat asking if folks should write down their anchor statement, have them there at the forum to be able to refer to them. My answer is going to be a strong no, right? You don't want to be looking down. It makes you seem unprepared. And if you're reading your notes word for word, it's going to make you seem detached from what is happening right there in the room. Your attention should be on the audience, the voter, the people who support you're trying to win. But people read your body language as much, if not more, than they are going to be reading, your actual words. Body language is such a significant part of human communication. So I think for most people, you got to sort of strike the balance between being mindful of how you're holding yourself and how you're projecting yourself, with sort of getting too much in your head about what your body language is. But you want to give the impression of being calm, confident, and collected throughout the entirety of the forum. So don't cross your arms, don't look down, don't read your notes.
So can you show us a little bit about the difference between a weak answer and a strong answer and kind of tie all of this good advice together?
Yeah. So let's imagine, right, the moderator is asking about the rising housing costs in the community. Okay, so I'm going to start off with what I would consider to be a bad answer, talk about why, and give you guys an example of what I would consider to be a good answer to that question. So, moderator asks, how do you address rising housing costs? My answer is, obviously housing is a big issue everywhere right now, not just here. And, when I talk to people, a lot of them mention housing, and there's no real easy fix because it is complicated and tied to so many things like zoning and the economy and interest rates, which are totally outside of local control. So I think we really just need to look at everything comprehensively and work together with my fellow counselors to try to make it. So that's not a good answer. I think that answer was packed with a lot of information, but I don't think if you were a person in the audience, you would have taken away what my position is in that. It was vague, it was rambly, and ultimately doesn't give voters anything to remember. I
Yeah.
challenge
I'll be
somebody in
honest,
the
I
chat.
tuned out a little bit.
Yeah, right. I was going to say, I challenge anybody in the chat right now to tell me what my position on housing was, right? Like off of that answer, I think it's very hard to identify. So I think a strong delivery of a very similar message, okay, but one that comes off a lot cleaner, is housing costs are squeezing families in our community, and we can't afford to wait for somebody else to fix it. That's my anchor statement, okay? That's why I'm running. On day one, I will push to cut unnecessary fees that drive up rent, expand affordable housing options, and partner with nonprofits so every family has a safe place to live. Because at the end of the day, a community where working families can't afford housing isn't a community that thrives. And I'm committed to changing that. So anybody notice the difference? Yeah, one's very clear, one's very concise, and it pivoted directly into my vision. I had my anchor statement, went right to my policy positions, and ended with a strong statement that a community where working families can't afford housing is a community. It isn't a community that thrives, right? That is a value statement. I was able to bring it back to my campaign values. So that's an example of a good one.
Excellent. So I'm going to drop this in the chat, but if you had just 30 seconds to answer this, why are you running? What phrases would you want voters to remember? I'd love for folks to chime in on this. And while we do, I want to pull up some of the questions that I see in the chat. I see from Billy, should I manage my facial expressions while others are talking? Forcing a smile or raised eyebrows at times. Derek, what's your take on how to react to being what it's said from your opponents?
I would be cautious, but that aside, right? You don't want to be making absurd faces while other people are speaking. That's generally considered disrespectful. I think it also depends on, again, things like the camera setup. Is there going to be a camera on your face the entire time your opponent is talking? I would recommend, maybe being expressive with your facial expressions so that something's happening on your side of the screen while your opponent's talking. I can think right now, the Paul Ryan Joe Biden vice presidential debate, circa was 2012, right, where Joe Biden got a lot of credit during that debate for sort of the facial expressions he was making at Paul Ryan, and the sort of very dismissive attitude he had towards his opponent generally during that debate. I would try to be measured unless you are someone who does a very good job expressing exactly what you mean with your face. I would try to remain relatively neutral while your opponent's talking. So
Another question, I believe this one came from Circle, but okay, I'm in a race for 4 seats and there are 6 candidates. So there are 3 incumbents. How do things differ in this situation where you have a mixture of incumbents that you're trying to draw contrast with and other candidates who are running for those seats, who are in the same seat as you? They're both outsiders and insiders, essentially, that you have to differentiate against in a debate.
yeah, I don't think functionally there's a whole lot different in how you would prepare for the debate, how you would answer questions. I think there might be a little bit of difference on how you are contrasting and sort of what statements you're choosing as your anchor statements. Going back to Reagan's line, do you feel better off now than you did 4 years ago? Like, that is messaging designed to be running against an incumbent, right? And if you are challenging an incumbent, I think there are all kinds of phrases you can use about how your community needs a new generation of leadership, right? There are phrases that you can anchor in there to compare yourself to incumbents that you might not use if you're running in an open seat against just another single candidate. But there is, I think, a difference in how you talk about your opponents when you are dealing with multi-candidate, multi-seat races where, the top 3 or 4 vote getters are going to be the top, because you also don't want to alienate anybody else's supporters if they might give you a vote or if they have multiple votes to give. And so in that case, it's not so much about, taking votes away from your opponent, but again, sort of proving yourself as a competent, capable, qualified person to run for office.
Mm-hmm. I think the other opportunity in a race like that, where there are 6 candidates and there are 4 seats, is to think about who you align with and when to show agreement, right? Because some of the folks who you're on the stage debating with, it's not a question of you only need to beat 2 of them, right? Essentially. So thinking through who do you create coalition and shared values with, to say, if I get elected, I'm going to work closely with my fellow councilmen to be able to accomplish these goals. What about bringing printed visual aids like graphs or photos to show the crowd, Derek?
It's going to be the exact perfect one. I mean, I think I've seen a lot more candidates get themselves in trouble with props, make themselves look silly with props, than I've seen candidates pull it off successfully, if I'm being honest. I would caution against it. One of the primary goals and things you should keep in your mind as you're going into forums, right? Like, one of the biggest goals is to do no harm. And you don't want the news headline to come out of your debate candidate acting out of pocket, right? That's not what you want the story to be about. I think there are opportunities to get earned media with prompts, and there are some potential upsides, but I've seen the downside, I've seen the risks, and they almost always outweigh the rewards when it comes to props in debates. So.
Yeah, I would echo that. And also, a lot of debate formats won't allow them. So be sure to check with your debate formats, and more often than not, it can be a distraction. So I think there's more liability with that than there is upside, as Derek put it. Ron had asked Derek, he's running in a small city where everyone knows the longtime council members. He's a newcomer to the city, but he's been there for 10 years. I don't want to offend. I just want to point out that we can do better with new ideas and fresh approaches. How do you avoid putting my opponents on the defensive or getting offended? And this is a good one. How do you draw a contrast without being overly critical or veering into a place of being disrespectful?
Yeah, I think you're focused on your why statement and your values. I do think there is room to draw contrast for sure. I like a line I've seen used to good effect is, especially when you're running against the sort of incumbents or you don't have a lot of political experience, which is a lot of the candidates that we work with. This is their first time running for office. But the line I like to use, voters are less interested in resumes than they are results, right? What matters is whether or not somebody understands the needs of our community, the challenges we face, and has the commitment to solve them, right? I think that framework of messaging is really, really powerful when you're running against someone who's been in office a long time. And again, one framework of messaging I like to use for challengers to incumbent is this idea of a new generation of leadership. And that's especially poignant the longer the incumbent has been in office, right? Where I live up in Maine, I've had the same U.S. senator since I can remember, right? Practically since I was born. And that's a line I think we'll see a lot in her U.S. Senate race that's coming up this year from whatever opponent comes out of the primaries there. But I think the best way to avoid denigrating your opponent is to not talk about them and to talk about yourself, your value, your vision, your priorities, and what you bring to the table. And if you say, hey, I'm the candidate in the race with the drive to get things done, it sort of begs the question of who is the candidate in the race that does not have the drive to get these things done, right? So I don't think if you're in a debate, the rule of thumb is don't ever say your opponent's name, right? That gives them a chance to respond to you. In forums, it tends to be a little bit different, but focus on you. And then you sort of avoid the pitfall of offending your opponent or feeling like you're disrespecting them. But also, I think having the understanding that you are both people on the ballot running for the same thing, both making the argument that you would be the best candidate for the job, and it's sort of nature of the beast to anticipate some sort of contrast messaging when you're in a forum or a debate. So I don't think it'll come as a blindside to your opponent unless you're really coming out swinging pretty hard. So
yeah, I think for the most part, as long as you keep away from any type of ad hominem attack and you speak to what's factual and true, especially their voting record, anything that's fact and verifiable, you'll be okay. I want to move, this is like the perfect kind of question to lead into this next section, which is talking about how to handle attacks and how to answer tough questions when they come your way. So let's go there, Derek. How should a candidate deal with direct attacks? And I know that there were some questions about this from folks who signed up. Billy had said that knowing that the newspaper is actively trying to make some candidates look poorly, how can I deflect those types of attacks? And lots of questions about how to either deflect attacks or deal with them. So I hand the floor to you on that topic.
Yeah, rule one, do not repeat the attack, right? All that does is reinforce it. If your opponent says, my opponent doesn't care about working families, and you say, my opponent says, I don't care about working families, but X, Y, and Z, you've just doubled up their point, right? Again, it's about what voters remember, what they're going to take away. Don't reinforce the attack, okay? Rule two is going to be pivot back to your values. And rule three is just stay composed, right? You guys can expect that there might be some unexpected questions. You should be keeping that in the back of your mind. There might be some unexpected attacks, but voters are going to be judging you based on your demeanor, not whatever line of questioning or attack that your opponent lays down if you're not reacting to it defensively. Stay calm, stay composed, don't help them reinforce their own messaging against you.
And what about if the moderator asks a sort of hostile or unexpected questions? Sometimes moderators themselves can bring some bias into debate space.
Yeah, you're always going to want to bridge back to your values and pivot back to your campaign priority. This is always going to be the answer to this, right? If you don't like the question you were asked, pivot it to a question you can answer confidently, right? So you should acknowledge the question. Always acknowledge the question that's asked of you. And I sort of gave my favorite line, which is, that's one perspective, but what I'm hearing voters talk about is XYZ. While others focused on that, I'm really focused on, expanding green space here in the city. Or something along the lines of, like, I'll be honest, no one person can solve this alone, but here's what I'll do if you elect me. Here's the things I'll try to do if you elect me. So there are phrases that you're going to use to pivot away from the question you don't want to answer, don't know how to answer, don't feel confident answering, back into your values, back into your why statement, and back into an area of the conversation where you are comfortable.
Excellent. And what should candidates do if they just don't know the answer to the question? Let's say you get a really heady policy question.
Yeah, for one, don't lie. Voters, for all their pluses and all their faults, their BS detectors are very finely tuned. Okay, do not lie to voters if you do not know. It is perfectly fine to say, I don't know. I like to use something like, I don't have that exact stat in front of me, but here's the principles that guide me when I'm making decisions, right? I'm going to fight for working families here in the community. I am going to pass policies that are going to help business growth here in my city, right? But you can say, I don't have that in front of me. I don't have enough information to make an informed decision on that, but here are the principles that guide me when I'm thinking about it. It's okay to say, I would love to get more information about this. As your next city councilor, I will make sure I meet with all stakeholders who are involved in this process. Again, that's the value of transparency and collaboration. But whenever you're going to, you can say, I don't know, and then again, pivot back to something that you are confident on, that you are comfortable with, and that connects back to your why statement.
Excellent. So I want to walk through how to do that pivot, what this looks like in practice with a real sort of question. And I know that you have sort of a 3-step formula that you like to use, Derek. What is that 3-step formula, and what does it look like in action?
Yeah, acknowledge, bridge, deliver. Okay, that is the 3 pillars on the stool of pivoting. You're going to acknowledge the question or the concern briefly. You're going to bridge with your transition phrase, and then you're going to sort of deliver your core message or core ideal, your core value. And again, some pivot phrases, some bridging phrases rather, that you can keep in your back pocket that you should sort of start firing off in little side conversations here or there as you are running up to your debate. But that's one perspective. What voters are telling me is XYZ. All right, that's my favorite. I'm always going to go back to that. I understand your concern, and it's why I believe X, Y, and Z. While others may focus on that, I'm focused on X, Y, and Z. And the real issue here is, which is a Rick Santorum favorite. If you guys have watched any Rick Santorum debates, that is probably his go-to line. The real issue here is XYZ. And then you immediately go from that bridging statement to your key point or your story, ideally a story that connects to your value. And the pivot works with this sort of acknowledge, bridge, deliver, because you don't actually deny the question, right? You acknowledge the concern or the question that the moderator asks you, and then you switch it to your values. So you sort of redirect it. You don't deny it, but you redirect it.
Mm-hmm. I'd love a concrete example of this, if you can.
Sure. So let's say the moderator asks, critics say you don't have enough experience to serve effectively. What do you say to that? I think sort of going back to the line I already used, but voters are more interested in results than they are resumes. What matters is whether or not somebody understands the struggles here in our community. That I think is a fairly quick, clean response to that type of question. But it works the same way. You acknowledge, I think voters are less interested in resumes. That's how do you respond to the critique that you don't have experience? And you bridge it. What matters most is that somebody understands, and then the value statement, right? What the challenges our community is facing, the problems that we're dealing with our roads, the problem with the school district, right? You connect it right back to whatever your sort of top 1, 2, or 3 campaign issues are. But I didn't deny the question, just sort of redirected it back into the area of focus that I wanted to talk about.
So a couple of questions here from the chat that I want to lift up. Rob asks a good question here. How do you break away from the pack when everyone sounds the same and when you're all talking about the same fundamental issues?
Assuming that your values are all identical and that every single person on the stage has the same issue positions, the same value statements, and the same why. If I were in that scenario, I'd be leaning very heavy on my personal and professional background to make me stand out. If everybody has a similar professional background, then I would focus really hard on my values. What's going to make you stand out is like in the moment, the honest answer could potentially be nothing, right? You're going to want to give a strong delivery, but at the end of the day, the videos from these forums, especially, can be chopped up into 60, 30, 15-second ads for your social media to help you get your vision out to more people. Like I said, your goal isn't always to win the audience in the room, right? Most people who vote, to be clear, most people who vote do not attend forums, right? They're not going to be the people in the room. So whether or not you stand out directly in the context of the actual meeting or forum, that's less important as making your points effectively and cogently and concisely so that you can take that footage and repurpose it for other things down the line when your campaign needs it.
Yeah, Rob, sometimes you win by not losing. These debates are great opportunities to shoot yourself in the foot by accidentally saying something that can be used against you. So sometimes not breaking out is okay, especially if it's a bigger debate with a lot of people. Everybody wants to win the debate or be the star of the debate, but sometimes, like I said, you win by not losing. And I think a lot of the advice around just nailing presentation, I think being able to say something memorable, talk in sound bites, even if you are saying similar things, being able to say it in a way that is clever and memorable, and being the person who speaks in those sort of sound bites the most, that's going to be what sets you up to be the most memorable person there. So good question. And I think it really boils down to the worst case scenario is that you say something embarrassing in this situation. So as long as you don't do that, you kind of win. Hunting and picking through these questions a little bit here. What do you do when candidates are not invited to debate? There's an example here where opposition candidates have not been invited to a forum for 2 years while other candidates have been invited. And I know oftentimes independent candidates don't get invited to the same debates that party candidates get invited to. Any advice for someone who's being frozen out of a debate, Derek?
Yeah, I would say there are if you're talking about debates, right, and not forums, which I am going to treat as very kind of separate experiences for the candidate. if you were being iced out of a debate, you know what that sounds like? A great LTE. You know what I mean? Like that sounds like something to make noise about, that you can like fire up your supporters about. If it is connected to a certain goal, I know a lot of debates, especially the sort of higher up the political food chain you go, a lot of it is based on like how much money you're raising or how much you're polling in the last, polling aggregate. Is that you can use those as call to actions to fire up your supporters, right? So ultimately, even if you are iced out of a debate, you can still sort of pivot against not being invited and use that to your advantage. For forums, most of the time, if you're not invited, just means that you have to contact the organizer of the forum. I know the League of Women Voters, who's probably the #1 purveyor of like candidate forums at the municipal level across the country. They are a great nonpartisan organization. They often invite candidates from all sides of the political aisle to do candidate forums, and but they don't always have everybody's contact information. So if you need to reach out to them proactively to make sure you get on the list, do that. But there's very little harm in asking. And if you're in a situation maybe where your opponent is refusing to debate or attend a forum with you, that's also something that you can make noise about over the course of the campaign, especially if you are running on a platform of transparency and collaboration, proactive communications with your constituencies instead of reactive communications. So there are, I think, a lot of ways to sort of make noise about it and turn gold out of what would otherwise be a fairly disappointing situation, getting locked out of a debate. So make them regret it. Make them regret not inviting you. That's my honest advice. Like make some noise about it.
I see a question from Regina Campbell about a very specific question. I'll read the question. And it says here, how would you answer this? With rising housing costs displacing families and destabilizing neighborhoods, some community members describe this as a form of economic genocide. How can we pivot from this crisis to create true stability, equity, and long-term growth in our community? Now, Regina, your answer is going to be different than my answer to this, but what I did with this question when Derek was answering the last one is I went into goodparty.org's tools and I asked the AI to answer that question using what it knew about me, because that's a hard question, right? But in my mock profile, it has a lot of information about me, and this is the response that it gave, and I think it's a response that does a good job of immediately anchoring in empathy and then pivoting to a vision. So the response that I worked up for this based on my actual, theoretical run for office background is the pain families feel is real. And when it comes to unaffordable housing, that's something that tears at the fabric of our community. And the truth is, we don't have to accept displacement as destiny. We can build stability and expanding affordable housing options by cutting red tape that drives up costs and partnering with local nonprofits so families aren't going to be pushed out. At the end of the day, a community only thrives when every family is safe, has affordable places to call home, and that's the future that I'm fighting for. So what I like about that, again, it immediately frames empathy. The pain families feel is real, period. But it doesn't have to be destiny. There are things that we can do within our control. Here are some of these specific policies, without going into the weeds too much, that we could implement that could lead to a future where the community has housing for everyone. So I would try to kind of take everything that Derek is saying here, where you acknowledge the pain that's evident in that question, but also offer up a vision for hope and how to get there. I want to get back to a little bit about talking about creating memorable moments, talking in sound bites, that sort of thing. Derek, how can you create debate moments that stick?
Yeah, three things: brevity, emotion, and leadership. It's fairly straightforward. Like Rob said, you want to get your sound bites right from these forums, these 2 or 3 memorable lines, the impressions you want folks to take away, right? You want stories that hit home, things that are emotionally compelling, and a tone that makes you seem like the grown up, like the adult in the room, right? And an example of what I'm talking about is again, speaking of sound bites, like every child deserves a safe walk to school, right? And that starts with fixing our roads, right? Government should be working with working families, not against them, right? And what I would do in your prep for these debates is think about the 2 or 3 lines you would love to see splashed on the front of the New York Times. Candidate in Missouri says this thing. Isn't that great, right? So those you should work out, and they shouldn't maybe be scripted. You do still want to weave them into stories from the community, but I think it's really important that you sort of sketch out at least the framework of what you like these sound bites to be before you ever get up onto the stage. So, and if you are running your campaign messaging fairly tight, those sound bites should fall pretty much in line with what you have in your why statement and the 2 or 3 main points that you've identified as your platform throughout the course of your campaign.
Love it. Any suggestions for opening statements? This comes from the chat, and making your opening statements as memorable as possible.
Yeah, practice. This is probably one of the most scripted parts of a forum. It's expected typically that candidates give an opening statement and a closing statement. Again, these should be your why statement, right? Yeah. The why you are running for office, the thing that telegraphs your values and your very vaguely your issue positions, but ultimately your values. Because again, people are going to walk away from there remembering how you made them feel about things. They're not going to remember your words. And so I think it's really important that you practice your opening statement and that it is very consistent with the language that you're using in your why statement, that you should be, using basically every day with almost every new voter that you come in contact with. So.
Yeah, I really love this question, and I agree with everything Derek said. You start with your values, why you're running. I think it's helpful to anchor initially with a story because that really captures people's attention. That's a way, again, to create something that's memorable. Be sure to land your vision. You're explaining what people get when they vote for you. What is the promise that you're making essentially to the voters? And then think through what the bumper sticker version of all of that is that you can drop at the end. What is that one line that you want everyone to repeat after the debate if they're asked, okay, what did Rob Booth say? Essentially, what is that bumper sticker version of what this person stands for or believes? What's your mic drop moment? Even better if you can call back to that in your closing arguments later in the debate. So that would be my advice on that piece. Derek, final thoughts on making memorable moments, especially without sounding too rehearsed, which I know is oftentimes a little bit of a pitfall.
Yeah, you weave them into stories, and I've talked about this a few times, and I'd like to talk a little bit about how to do this effectively in a way that's emotionally compelling. Like the example I used before, I'll always go back to President Obama, who I think is a master at this type of thing. But while you're out talking to folks in the community, through your voter outreach, conversations you have at the door, conversations you're having at the farmer's market, you should be noting down the pain points that you're hearing from your community. I think it's really important to understand. If you came to my the messaging training that I led here for Good Party Academy, we talked about your potholes, your pocketbooks, your prescriptions, right? Your solutions to things. Those should be information you're gathering throughout the course of the campaign. And even if you don't use somebody's name, like, oh, I spoke to my neighbor Mike, and my neighbor Mike is experiencing these problems, you can sort of couch it in sort of vague, anonymous type language. When I'm out on doors, I met a man, and this man is struggling to pay his rent because of just how much the rent is increased here in town over the last 3 years, right? But you tie it to a real person who's experiencing real problems who would benefit from your solution, right? And when you connect it to a human being, when you bring human emotions into it, that's where you're going to start changing minds. That's where you're going to find the lines that people remember, because they might not be able to give you word for word your conversation, your story about this community member of this problem that your community is experiencing, but they certainly will remember that you spoke about it empathetically, that is an issue you care about enough to talk to people about, which is really huge. But whenever possible, you want to find an example of the issue that you want to address and how that person would be impacted by the solution you're offering. So the more you can weave these types of personal stories or anecdotes into your answers, the more human you're going to feel, the more human you're going to seem, and the more people are going to connect emotionally with the message that you're trying to get across.
Excellent. So I want to go ahead and share my screen here for a moment. And I'm going to show some additional tools and resources that we have available in addition to this training that you can make good use of if you have a debate coming up. So I'm going to drop a link first, though. Our Circle community, which there's a link here for, is where some of these assets can be found easily. And our Circle community, where I know a lot of folks are watching tonight, is a tremendous network of fellow candidates, people who are running for office, who are giving great peer support. And to our call producers, I just sent a request to be able to share my screen. Thank you. And I'm going to go ahead and share. So this is the Circle community and what it looks like. I saw a question asked earlier about, will we be sharing the transcript for this call? We put recordings and transcripts for all of these trainings in this Good Party Live recording space the next day. It usually goes up around 1 o'clock East Coast time at the very latest. And there are hours and hours of trainings on all sorts of topics that you can find here. But one of the things that we have, in addition to the courses and all of the conversation that happens, is we have a AI campaign coach. And this is a chatbot who's trained on all of the courses and trained on all of the conversations that have happened in this community. And it's a really powerful tool for being able to brainstorm around debates. And you can see my internet is loading very slowly right now. But I went through and played around with this a little bit, asking the community coach to help simulate a debate. And it gave me some really good advice. So give it the easiest, help me with debate prep. And it said a lot of what Derek has been saying, the importance of staying consistent with your message, adapting to voters' feedback, et cetera. And it links to further resources that you can use to be able to sharpen your debate prep. I give it a little bit more information saying, hey, I'm running for mayor in Portland, Maine. My opponent is a much more experienced Democratic incumbent. What are some questions that I should expect? What are some attacks to look out for? What are good responses? How can I position them as the establishment or status quo candidate, and me as the independent who will help to bring real progress along stagnant issues? And it did all of that, and again pointed to resources that I can use elsewhere on the board. And then I asked it, hey, can you role play the debate with you scripting some of the questions and answers? And it did a really good job. And I'll kind of pick one or two of these. As a newcomer, how do you plan to address the challenges that have persisted under the current administration? And this, I saw a lot of people asking questions about how do I overcome a lack of experience, for example. And I think this is a pretty good answer, where it says, while I may be new to the political arena, I bring a fresh perspective and a commitment to innovative solutions. My focus is on engaging directly with the community to understand their needs and implementing practical strategies that have been overlooked. Unlike the current administration, I'm not bound by party politics, which allows me to prioritize the community's interest above all else, which I think is a pretty decent response. We also have in the resource space an interactive exercise for debate and Q&A practice. And this goes not just for debate, but for forums, as folks asked about. This is a great exercise to go through if you have a debate coming up. And we also have some really great blog content out there that you can look into. You know, we have 10 tips for preparing for your first debate. If you use debate as a keyword in a search on our blog, you'll find all sorts of really great content on this topic. So in addition to this training, there are some great tools available, all of these accessible in goodparty.org's community in Circle. So I will go ahead and stop sharing my screen there. And again, just remind folks, please join the Circle community to keep this conversation going. I want to also go ahead and ask our producers to drop. We always ask a survey to get feedback on these trainings. I know Derek has been doing a great job answering some of your questions, but if we could have you guys answer that survey. Now I want to make a last call for questions in the chat as well. And we'll spend the next 5, 10, 15 minutes answering questions that people have, starting with let's see. There was a question about how to shake off pre-debate jitters,
Oh, man, I recommend square breathing myself. I mean, that's going to come down to you personally and how you deal with your anxiety. But for me, I can tell you I'm a big box breathing, square breathing, 4x4 breathing, whatever you want to call it, type person. But I also think if you prepare, if you know what you want to say and the points you want to get across, and you're confident about your why statement, that you are going to do okay. I mean, that's one of the things to keep in mind. Again, the bare minimum goal is do no harm. And I think if you're preparing correctly, then there's very little risk of doing harm unless you start speaking out of line and being out of pocket. But the best way to get rid of the nerves is to prepare and feel confident.
Mm-hmm. Derek, Billy asked for a little bit more on body language. Is it better to mirror your opponent? Like, what is some guidelines around body language? He gave the example of, should I lean forward with fingers interlaced? Should I be energetic? Should I lean back and confident and comfortable? What's the best sort of body language to convey on stage?
The body language that I like to see as a voter and as a campaign manager type is always going to be calm, cool, collected. I think if you are in a scenario where your opponent is like a very animated person, I think you can draw a pretty stark contrast by just sort of being even keel. I don't think I would mirror my opponent's body language. I just sort of be mindful of my own. However, I think when it comes to how you present yourself sitting up on, in most cases, in front of a table, if you're a forum, calm, cool, collected, hands on the table, one non-pointed hand for emphasis. If you are a hand speaker, do the old Bill Clinton point. But otherwise, like just try to feel confident and calm. That's the biggest thing. If your calm is a little bit more energetic than other folks, that is okay. But for you, calm and collected, as long as you are feeling that way, 95% of the time you're going to be presenting that way. And that's the impression you want to leave with voters, that you're confident and capable.
Excellent. Any advice for overcoming objections to running as an independent? My quick answer on this one, Ron, who asked this in the chat, is to say elections are all about choice, and voters deserve as many choices as they can get at the ballot. And that's why I'm running, to give more choices to voters, and in my opinion, give them a better choice, a choice of someone who's not beholden by party politics, someone who is willing to put people before party and before profit.
Yeah, Rob nailed it. I mean, I think the pushback for independence has a lot to do with message framework around giving voters more choice. I think there's an opportunity, especially if you live in a place that maybe has had one party control of city government for a long time. If you're in a situation where you have partisan municipal elections, to ask that Ronald Reagan questions, like the city's been run by the Democrats for 30 years. Do you guys feel better off than you did before, right? And tie it to sort of people over partisanship, people over politics, right? Community over everything else, right? Community over party. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for messaging around being an independent. I think it's easier in nonpartisan races than it is in partisan races. But I do think if you're couching it in the framework of voter choice, that tends to resonate.
Kellyanne asked Derek if you can reshare your acronym, the BEL acronym that you shared under memorable moments, which I think was brevity, emotion, and leadership.
Oh, yeah. Brevity, emotion, leadership. Nailed it.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever given it the acronym BEL, but I might now forever, whoever that was. So,
yeah. And then there's the question, how do you answer who did you vote for president? And I think that this boils down to, is that a question that you want to answer, or is it a question that you don't want to answer? I think for the most part, that question doesn't matter at all. It probably doesn't impact at any level your ability to do the job of mayor or city council or any sort of local office. And anyone who's asking that is probably asking it as a trap of some sort. So if I were asked that on a debate stage, I would take some of the really good advice that Derek has given around pivoting to answer a question that I actually do want to answer. And I might even call this one out directly, more directly than I'd call out others, by saying, this is the perfect the Ronald Reagan of, there you go again. People are, unfortunately, folks are so obsessed with party allegiances that they want to know who I voted for president. And the fact of the matter is, I'm an independent who puts people over party. I'm more concerned about how do we balance the budget in this town, or how do we fix the housing crisis that we have in this town. So I don't want to answer the question of who I voted for president. The right to vote is a sacred vote and a private right. And I rather focus on things that matter, like how are we going to fix these issues in our town? So that would be my take on that. Derek, how about you?
Yeah, I almost always encounter this question as a trap. I think there's typically, unless you're running for Congress or higher, typically it has no impact on your ability to win your race. And to double tap on what Rob said, I would immediately pivot. Look, I understand why people might be concerned about what's happening at the national level, but here in Livermore Falls, Maine, I'm worried about making sure that our budget is balanced. And when I talk to folks here in the community, that's the concern I hear most often, and that's what I will fight for as your next mayor, right? You acknowledge the question, you pivot right back into your values and your vision. But ideally, you wouldn't answer it. It is a trap. It is a trap, just to be clear, almost every time.
Yeah. Cue the General Akbar meme. It's a trap. So with a large number of candidates, how much can you answer or not answer questions? The good news is, in a structured debate, the questions should be divided amongst the candidates equally. You might not get a chance to weigh in on every single question. And sometimes questions are directed towards specific candidates. You still have the ability, though, to use the time that you have allotted in any which way. And you see this a lot sometimes in televised debates where candidates will be asked a question. They'll say, I'd actually like to respond to the question my opponent was asked. And it's not always the moderator's favorite thing for you to do, but it is something that you see frequently. But in an open sort of debate, you know, where people are taking the mic and answering, you know, an open forum, I think that you want to make sure that you're getting an equal share of time on the microphone to all of your opponents. You don't want to be seen as someone who doesn't have an opinion or a solution on these issues. I believe that we've made it through all of the open questions at this point. So I'm happy if there's one or two more that drop in the chat to answer questions. But Derek, let's begin to wrap this up. What are some of the biggest things that candidates should take away from tonight's training on debate prep?
Yeah, for one, practice what your top 3 points are, what you want your sound bites to be, and practice pivots. Find a partner that you can practice with. Use the chatbot that is available in Circle to do a little bit of debate prep. But prepare your top 3 points in your pivots. Deliver with presence, right? Your body language and tone matter as much, if not more, than the actual words you're saying to the audience. You should be handling your attacks calmly and be able to pivot those attacks back to your values. And you should be striving to create 1 or 2 memorable lines, memorable moments that stick. So if you're hitting all 4 of those points, you are setting yourself up to have a really excellent debate.
Excellent. Well, I think that about covers it, folks. I want to thank you all for the really great questions. This was a really fun conversation to have. And Derek, thank you for your generosity with your time and answers to these questions. I'm going to ask our producers to drop 2 links in the chat. One is a link to our Circle community, where again you can find a lot of the really great tools that we make available for folks. And I also want to have them drop the sign up page for our next training event. So in 2 weeks, we are going to have a training on rapid response, basically crisis management, putting together a playbook for when the unexpected happens. And when you need to, you know, basically deal with some of the public attacks. Let's say you have a debate and you totally blow it. This is the training for you. So it's what to do when things go wrong on your campaign. We're going to talk about troubleshooting in all sorts of different directions. So yeah, thank you all. I hope to see you in Circle in the coming weeks, and see you in 2 weeks at the Rapid Response Playbook training.